Unashamed and say no more to domestic violence and sexual assault. After so many years of floating from one toxic relationship to another, I found myself one day standing in the middle of my bedroom in front of the fireplace, and the tears were rolling down my eyes. Yes, I was there in front of the fireplace. You couldn't hear no fire crackling. There was no beaming light coming from the fire or anything like that, because there was no fire even in the fireplace. I just stood there, still feeling alone, and I was crying out to God, and I was saying to myself, when will this ugly cycle stop? What was wrong with me? Why was I constantly attracting men that did not care about me? They all had these narcissistic behaviors where they wanted me to be withdrawn from everything but be nothing to them. I was a doormat. I was a punching bag. And it was only until that day when I stood there alone in my bedroom, crying out and trying to figure out what was wrong with me. That's when my true healing began. I had to start looking at myself in the mirror. I had to start examining me and asking God to show me who I really was. And it was on that same day when I became quiet so that I could actually hear from God. There was a card sitting on my table that came in the mail that I had not opened, and I decided to open it. And it was a card that one of my sisters mailed to me. And in there, it talked about where she was encouraging me to remember who I was. And I began to realize that I was a jewel, but I had been beaten down. I stood behind the closed doors. I didn't want anybody to know what was going on with me. So even when I walked into the law firms or wherever I was working at or into the courthouse, I always had a smile on my face, because I didn't want anybody to see how I was really hurting on the inside. So I stood behind the closed doors and I was totally silent about this thing called domestic violence and sexual assault. So as I began to go through the healing process, I had to not only understand me, but I also had to understand this crazy disease that nobody wanted to talk about. Not even the preachers, not even the teachers, not even your moms and your sisters or your brothers. Nobody wanted to talk about this thing that was destroying me on the inside. And I don't even realize if it was that they didn't want to talk about it. It was more that I was afraid and I was ashamed to even say what was going on with me. I thought that I had this image that I had to portray for other people. But on the inside, I was dying and I was lying to myself. So even in this healing process, I began to study about what happens, what are the signs. And then I realized that not only did I see the signs, I knew the signs, but I ignored the signs. And as I began to feel my healing and my help coming on, to realize that I'm not what happened to me, but I am who I choose to be, I began to become delivered. I knew I was delivered when I was able to not only forgive the people who had done these things to me, but I was able to forgive myself. I was able to forgive myself for thinking that I deserve this type of behavior, that men could just buy me and flower me with roses, but then the very next week they could beat me down to a pulp. I realized that I had to forgive myself, because even in this toxic relationships, I found myself one day where I even wanted to try to poison the person who was beating me and poisoning me, not only mentally but physically. They were in control of my finances. They were in control of where I go and where I come from. I began to withdraw from my family members, but I stayed in contact with God, because I knew that deep on the inside, God knew my heart. God knew what He had for me, that He had a more purpose, a greater purpose for me. I remember the day that I truly got set free. And on that day, I rejoiced and I was glad, and it was like the weight was just falling off of my shoulders. And I was set free because I was determined that I needed to be healed, delivered, and set free. And because of this trauma, I found where I was not even able to have a child, a woman of God that loves the Lord and that truly believes that children are a blessing from God. But my experiences were not just for me. They were for me to share light, to stand up unafraid, without fear, no shame at all because of the stigma, and break the silence and constantly say no more to domestic violence or sexual assault. I know what it feels like to you, of those who may be listening, who are probably going through this situation right now. And He's loving on you, and He's buying you roses, and He's telling you you're the best thing that ever happened to Him. And He's making you feel that you are so lovable. And then within the next second, minute, hour, the day, the week, and then He violently attacks you again. And you crying out, and then He's so sorry, and he acts like He's so sorry for what He's done to you. But I say to you today that there is a place where you can be healed, delivered, and set free. And so we ask you right now to look within yourself and believe that you are the jewel that God designed you to be. For you are a designer original, and that there is help for you. If you're listening and you know somebody, I encourage you to dial 911. I encourage you to call the Safe Shelter. I encourage you to call for the Jewel and You Global Incorporated, so that we can provide you the necessary resources, the professionals, to help you safely go from one level to another level. We ask you to think about the children, because 1 in 3 children are eyewitnesses to this awful attacks that are happening to parents every day. They walk into the schools and you're trying to figure out why they won't eat, or why they're sleeping at the desk, because something traumatic is going on around them. And we just need to open up our eyes and understand the signs, so that we can see the behaviors that are happening with our children. We need to open up our eyes and understand the behaviors that our parents are portraying to you, and they're constantly crying out for help. So we rise today unashamed and without fear, and we say no more to domestic violence and sexual assault.